After the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, of course, the rally that Pavel organized was the most famous. But there was a kind of movement of protest. If you read the sources at the time, there were lots of people arrested for protesting the invasion of Czechoslovakia in various Soviet cities. However, there was not one government official that resigned in protest at the time from Soviet diplomacy or Soviet government. And today we have a different situation, which actually is also another source of hope. We have with us Boris Bondarev, who works for Russia's foreign ministry until May of this year, when he resigned in protest against the invasion of Ukraine. Boris Bondarev was first a counselor to the Department on Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, and then counselor to Russia's permanent mission to the UN office in Geneva. He became the first Russian official to resign as a result of this war, but something tells me that he will not be the last. And I just want to share on my screen, on your screen, the post that he made on LinkedIn. I have never been so ashamed of my country as on February 24 of this year. The aggressive war unleashed by Putin against Ukraine, and in fact against the entire Western world, is not only a crime against the Ukrainian people, but also perhaps the most serious crime against the people of Russia. Those who conceived this war want only one thing: to remain in power forever. I studied to be a diplomat and have been a diplomat for 20 years. The ministry has become my home and family, but I simply cannot any longer share in this bloody, witless, and absolutely needless ignominy. So I'm very proud to have with us Boris, whose skills will be very much needed when Russia will have to reinvent its diplomacy from ground zero.
Thank you very much. Good day to all of you, colleagues, and thank you, Dmitry, for inviting me. It is my privilege and my honor to be speaking here. And and I was a Russian diplomat for 20 years, since 2002. And for these 20 years, I've been witnessing this slowly degradation of Russian foreign policy as a reflection of this slowly degradation process of the entire Russian state, which ended up now in this, well, I would say, semi-totalitarian regime. And yes, after Putin invaded Ukraine in February, it was crystal clear for me that I could not any longer be associated with this government, with this policy, and with these atrocities. And so now I'm joining this community of Russian emigre abroad, so to speak. And I would like to share with you maybe some thoughts as a former diplomat about how Russian community abroad, like Russian immigrants, may facilitate to overcome this very tragic situation we find ourselves in now. So as a diplomat, I'm more like practically minded person, I may think so. So first of all, as already said, as Dmitry just cited my public statement, I consider this war as a major crime by Putin against Russia's future. First of all, we see thousands of best and brightest Russian minds fleeing their own country. It's about tens of thousands have already left Russia for good. So Putin thereby deprives Russia from its best talented, most creative, most advanced people. And the future of the country is becoming more dim and grim and very, very tragic. And we may see at the end a vast country inhabited by very poor, very ignorant and very aggressive people, totally brainwashed by state propaganda. And this picture is very likely if this war is not stopped and the Putin regime not toppled. I see two main areas in which Russian immigration communities, if they can organize in such, could facilitate the positive outcome of this situation. First, it is the war, of course. And I think it is clearly understood and shared by many of us that Putin must not be allowed to win this war. If he wins, it will be a catastrophe for all free democratic world. because Putin's victory will not only make him a bigger threat to Europe and the United States, it also shows all his fellow dictators that now they're free to do whatever they please. The world order based on rules will be over. And the authority of the Western countries, the image of liberal democracies will be greatly compromised. And the world which Putin is offering now is a kind of medieval world where everyone fights everyone. And the only legitimacy is that which is born by strength, not by any other human values. And if Putin wins, he will not limit himself only to Ukraine. He will have to find another target very soon. It may be Kazakhstan, it may be Moldova, it may be even Baltic states. So it will only postpone this war again and again until we find ourselves on a brink of, apocalypse. So that is a common understanding, as I hope it is, that Putin must lose the war. And the shortest way is that Ukraine defeats Russian troops and force them to retreat and withdraw from their territory. And to achieve this objective, Ukraine needs to have as much military-related supplies as it is required. Weapons, munitions, all that stuff that Ukrainian troops are requiring right now. And I'm looking through internet and I see some discouraging news sometimes that some Western countries and politicians may seem rather hesitant or reluctant to provide Ukraine with necessary assistance. And there are even some suggestions that Kyiv should make peace with Putin right now, so-called peaceful end. They say that it will stop the war and it will help to avoid further bloodshed and human casualties, but it is in fact very dangerous and erroneous approach. Also, a protracted war or long-term, low-intensity armed conflict is not an option, I think. First, it will be devastating for Ukraine. The Ukrainian economy is already almost destroyed. If the conflict will take more months or even years, then Ukraine may just collapse as a country, as a nation, despite their fantastic bravery and courage on the battlefield. So it's not an option for Ukraine, it's not an option for Western world, which supports Ukraine, because Western countries, especially European countries, will inevitably face more economic and other difficulties at home. And that may make them reduce their support to Ukraine, which also will only benefit Putin. Putin, in his turn, will take some time to replenish his forces, to get ready for another onslaught and to begin. So I think this also is not an option. So the key factor is that Putin is defeated on the battlefield in Ukraine. So Russian community, those who can hear of decision makers in Europe and the United States, in parliaments, of influencers and so on, they should speak at every opportunity for urgent assistance for Ukraine. Only defeating Putin on the battlefield will be able to guarantee Ukrainian freedom, independence, and sovereignty. However, I don't think it would be enough just to defeat Putin, because while Putin regime is in place, whether with Putin himself or with some other leader in his place, this regime will always pose a great threat to all its neighbors. It is in his nature. It's a truly fascist regime, which is aggressive by nature, and they cannot be peaceful even if they wanted to. So even defeated Russian regime will keep looking for another victim, for another target, and they will strike, and they will become a great source of instability, of wars throughout the Eurasia. So the main threat to European and world security is the Putin regime. So it must be removed one way or another. So, as I say, that we Russians abroad who want to help Ukraine and who want to help Russia also to get rid of Putin regime, we must advocate that only military defeat in Ukraine would open the way for peace, for Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, and for finishing off Putin and his dictatorship, which is the main threat to world security right now, because it's the only country now, unfortunately, which blackmailing the world with nuclear weapons, with hunger, and with the energy supplies. So it is Putin hasn't killed so many people as Hitler did so far, but taking into account that he has nuclear weapons and he indicated his willingness to use them, I think his threat and menace is just as equal as Hitler's. So it's the first and maybe main area where Russian immigrants, political activists in exile should focus their attention in convincing and advocating for support for Ukraine, first of all. And the second area, which also is important, is that this war changed a lot the reputation of Russia. I don't say that it was a very good reputation, but now I see many people turn against Russia as such. They tend to think that it is not Putin who invaded Ukraine, who devised this war. It is like all Russian war. All Russians allegedly support the war. All Russians are genetically warmongers or something. It is very dangerous talk, very dangerous narrative. And maybe it is quite loud in social media. Maybe it is less loud in daily life. But I believe that once unleashed, this narrative can spread very widely and very swiftly, because it provides with a very simple answer to quite a complex issue. So we already hear calls for isolating Russians, for punishing Russians, all of them Russians, not distinguishing between those who are really supporters of Putin and those who actively fight him, both in Russia or abroad. There is this talk in Europe about visa ban for Russians. And so I see here there may be some kind of roots of some Russian discrimination in the future. And if this war is a long time, I'm afraid that this discrimination may become very negative factor, which cannot be not taken into account. So in this area, I think we all must focus on informing people about true Russia, about free Russia, about those Russians who fight Putin, telling people that not all Russian, that Russian society is not homogeneous, it is split. There are tens of millions of people who hate this war. They are just scattered, they're just leaderless, they're just helpless. They are repressed and suppressed by this regime, but there are people, a lot of people, and they need help. So it will be very important for people here in the West, I mean, first of all, politicians and decision makers, to realize that the war will be over sooner or later. And we will have to somehow to negotiate peace and somehow to negotiate the relations between the Western countries, Ukraine, of course, and Russia. And if this negative narrative about Russians, about Russian guilt, Russian responsibility, and so on, which is definitely a separate question, and it should be discussed also. But if this narrative is in place, or maybe even dominates the rhetoric and political concepts by the end of the war, then I think it would be very difficult to overcome and to negotiate something good and something solid. So anyway, the most important thing is to show that Russian people have potential to change. That Russian people will need help from the Western countries after the war. Not only Ukraine will need help, of course, but also Russia, most like a kind of a Marshall Plan or something. So, because if we just isolate Russia and say, okay, Putin is defeated, Putin withdraw his troops from Ukraine, and okay, we just isolate Russia, we build a wall between Russia and Europe, and then you Russians may do whatever you want within your country. It will not remove the problem. It will not solve it, because Russians will be boiling in their own juice, and then it will go out again, even more aggressively, maybe with real nuclear weapons used, who knows. So I think that this ideological front, if I may say so, is very important. And Russians abroad, Russians in the United States, in Europe, I think must do whatever they can. And I don't really know now how it could be, in particular, be done, but we must speak for our compatriots there in Russia, to give them a chance after the war, to help them rid of Putin, to help them to help a new pro-democratic forces in Russia come to power. It help may be different, but I hope that Western leaders must now realize that this scenario is also possible, and it should be considered as positive scenario, because without help, without assistance, Russia will deteriorate further and further. And consequences of this would be just unpredictable. Thank you.